Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the Tides of Torment DLC for Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. It has been 10 days since the DLC has come out, so we now have hard data on how well it has been doing and how Warhammer 3 has been doing since December 4th. And well, the answer to that question is very clear. Warhammer 3 is doing pretty good at the moment, but Tides of Torment as a DLC, not so much. It's not doing great at all. In fact, it might be the worst performing DLC from a sales standpoint in Total War Warhammer 3's history. And it should be mentioned that while there are a good number of players at the moment for Warhammer 3, that also comes after Creative Assembly allowed a far larger player base to play Immortal Empires than before. Basically, if you own a Warhammer 1 or 2, you can play Immortal Empires right now. And they also revealed Engash, and they also announced Total War 40k at the Game of the Year Awards show. So their marketing over the last couple of weeks has been significant. In fact, they might have spent more on the marketing than on actually developing the DLC. Of course, that makes sense when you're thinking about Total War 40k, Nagash, 25th anniversary, and so on. But let's take a look at the actual figures, because we do have them. From SteamDB, at the moment, there are 53,000 concurrent players in Warhammer 3. That's a great number, but again, they've made Immortal Empires far more widely available than it had been before. So these are not people who have just purchased the DLC or even necessarily returning Warhammer 3 players. These are newer players who never got the game in the first place, but who own Warhammer 1 and 2. And there's also Steam sales going on right now. There's a trilogy sale on Steam for Warhammer 3, 2, and 1. So these numbers are significant. It has gone up as high as 64,000 concurrent players from roughly 25,000, 30,000 concurrents that we had before. In fact, if we look at this chart over this entire year, it's not quite doubled, at least right now, but except that peak of 64,000, but it has gone up by a fairly substantial amount. So that's a success. Yes, it is a success by making Immortal Empires far more widely available, but that isn't a success for Tides of Torment. Because if we look at Tides of Torment, the figures aren't so good. So let's take a look at the individual packages. I'm going to just look at Aislinn and Sail. So Aislinn is the one that has gotten the most reviews, and as a result of that, the most played out of the three lords. That's how it works. Malachi got a huge number of reviews for Thrones of Decay. He is the most played campaign according to Creative Assembly. So when we look at these figures, 436 reviews total in 10 days. Sounds good, but let me just give you an idea. This is less than Shadows of Change. This is less than individual Lord packs in the same time period of Thrones of Decay. So when I'm talking about Shadows of Change, I'm talking before they split the Lords. Now, granted, the reviews for Shadows of Change were overwhelmingly negative, so I guess that is a victory. But then we also look at Sail. Now, for Sail is mostly positive, but only 262 reviews. And to give you guys a comparison how things looked for Omens of Destruction, this is for Skulltaker. If I just scroll up here, Skulltaker Omens of Destruction DLC. And we can see on the first day, on December 12th, when Omens of Destruction came out, he got over 400 reviews. Positive and negative, it was 51% split. Now, he's still in the mixed category. Skulltaker and Gorbad did much better than Maneater, by the way. Or relatively better than Maneater. But even then, Omens of Destruction did get fewer reviews than Thrones of Decay. But even so, that is just on the first day, and they're already comparing to Aislinn after 10 days. Because when you start looking at how things looked after a week, how things looked after 2 weeks, things aren't so rosy for Tides of Torment. Of course, Omens of Destruction was not necessarily the most successful DLC, but it was more successful than the Tides of Torment one. And then if we look at Malachi McCason, well, what do you want me to say? Overall positive overall reviews, 1,000 reviews, but he got over 600 on the first day alone, as opposed to 10 days when we're looking at Sea Lord Aislinn. So regardless of how one looks at these numbers, it is very clear. Tides of Torment did not perform well as a DLC. Immortal Empires is performing well, but again, marketing plus more availability, that's the success there. Now, why exactly has this happened? Because obviously I could talk about my issues with the DLC, the gameplay issues and all that, but we first have to talk about the dynamics in the player base. We have to talk about the community, so to speak. People are not happy to wait 1 year for a DLC. Simple as that. And some will argue, well, plenty of people posted on Reddit that they were happy to wait. Yeah, that is what gets upvoted on Reddit. That doesn't represent community sentiment. And just because you get a certain sentiment that gets upvoted on Reddit, where dissenting voices, so to speak, get drowned out in downvotes, does not represent anything. My expectation with Tides of Torment was that, having played it, once I got access to it as a creator, before launch, my perspective was going to be this. It was either going to sell a good amount of copies and then get reviewed bombed, or it was going to get more positive reviews, but it was not going to sell a good amount of copies. That is precisely what ended up happening. It didn't get a review bombed, but what actually did occur is, from my view, worse. And it's worse because it means a lot of people aren't playing the DLC. And that is the biggest failure. Say what you will about Shadows of Change. A lot of people didn't buy Shadows of Change. But a lot of people did. More so than Tides of Torment. And from a company's perspective, it is better to have a bunch of angry fans at you that are still buying your DLC for $25 or whatever the price was regionally back when Shadows of Change came out, than it is to have people not showing up in the first place. I mean, people are showing up to play Warhammer free, so clearly the player base is there. They're just not buying Tides of Torment. And they're not buying Tides of Torment. It was a long development. It wasn't necessarily the most exciting DLC from the perspective of, oh, here's Slaanesh, here's Norska, and here's High Elves. The fact that High Elves ended up being the most popular portion of the DLC, well, clearly, because High Elves are one of the most popular races in Warhammer Fantasy. People talk about Chaos. I understand. There are fans of Chaos. I'm a fan of the Greenskins, etc. But that's not where a lot of the player base stands. People play Dwarves. People play Empire. And yes, people play High Elves. There's a lot of fans of High Elves. Not as many as Dwarves and Empire, to be certain on that. But certainly far more than the current DLC sales would indicate for the Tides of Torment. You could chalk it up for you could chalk up the poor sale figures or the poor number of reviews, the low number of reviews for Norska and Dakala on the basis of popularity, but you can't make that same argument for Aislinn. Of course, Aislinn is not the most significant High Elven character, but I also believe that it's down to the structure of the DLC and what we've seen again and again. And regardless of what some people may say on this, but what we have seen again and again and again with every single DLC where Creative Assembly has tried to do this, people do not like these limited settlement campaigns. They don't. And they certainly don't like campaigns where there's all these limiting mechanics, because that's the problem with Sail. Sail starts in a corner for a naval faction, which Norska is. Trog is substantially better to play than Sail is. Simple as that. Wulfric is substantially better to play than Sail is. And some will argue power, that's irrelevant. It's like, oh, you can be very powerful. Okay, you can be powerful as the Demon Prince. That's not going to get you people interested in playing something. And besides, if we're talking about power, it's not like Sail is the most powerful Ledgering Lord. Like, the Changeling is easily one of the most powerful Ledgering Lords in the game. And he is the least popular campaign in the game as a whole, by far. In every poll, in every discussion, by every metric that we have available, the Changeling, aka the guy who obliterates everyone that stands in his path, is not a popular campaign. Now, why is it worth talking about that? Because obviously I've stated before that Tides of Torment is not a great DLC, and I got a bunch of negative feedback on that subject. Some of it not necessarily organic, so to speak, on the subject. There's people who really love to crush any voice that goes against the Reddit or Discord or social media perspective on this, but the perspectives that are popular day-to-day on Reddit and Discord and so on do not represent the Total War community as a whole. And this is the problem for Creative Assembly. They've embraced the idea of allowing their community or their day-to-day community to be very toxic. And so a lot of people either just don't engage with that, or when they do engage, they engage in a very loud fashion, as they did in October. Because don't think that the people who got pissed at Creative Assembly in October just ended up being very happy with the current trajectory of CA. And that's kind of a warning signal for CA going forward. It's a warning signal not because Tides of Torment has clearly failed from a sales standpoint. It's a warning signal for Nagash. Yes, Nagash is going to sell well. But if they don't do that DLC properly, it may not do as well as you think. Like, if Nagash doesn't sell the most copies of any DLC in Total War history, that is a unmitigated failure. Simple as that, because it's Nagash. It's going to feature Tomb King stuff. It's going to be Cetra. It's going to be likely Tankwall and Vault, and that DLC should be the best performing DLC in Total War history by far. But if Creative Assembly doesn't learn these lessons and keeps going down the same path of let's do a lot of units, let's do a lot of visual stuff, and don't give us solid campaigns that play well within the current context of the game we have, not the game we'd want, the game we have, then their future DLCs are not going to do better, and their future games as well. Like, you know, I'm actually thrilled about what I've seen about Total War 40k. I can't quite say the same about Medieval 3 on that subject. But that's the problem. When you create echo chambers and only listen to those echo chambers, that is a recipe for disaster. I'm sure this video is going to be downvoted by the brigade on Discord and Reddit, because God forbid someone says hard truths. But the hard truth is this: Tides of Torment is a complete dismal failure of a DLC that was only salvaged, and only to a degree, by the fact that Creative Assembly spent a significant amount of money in one of the largest marketing campaigns that they've done really ever. And I'm not joking on that. Between Game of the Year announcement for 40k, the 25th anniversary, all the stuff they've done, they've spent probably millions. I mean, they might have spent on that marketing campaign over the last couple of weeks more than on the DLC, or several DLCs put together, dependent on what the budgets are for these things, but certainly more than they've spent on certain DLCs for Warhammer 3. And I'm not even talking about unit packs that they used to do in the past. That did salvage this situation, but I think it's very telling that the best campaign from 7.0 that came with Tides of Torment is not a paid DLC one. It's Lokier. That's all I have to say. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more.
You are